Hello, everybody. Today we are going to review I guess originally probably what was supposed to be the last in the Rocky movie series, obviously, with Rocky 5. But then again, who knew 16 years later we would get another Rocky Balboa movie, and then another few years later, I think, when did the first Creed movie come out? 2015, so I guess almost 9 years between those two, and now who knows how many Creed movies we're going to get. We could get a pretty substantial amount of those, and then I guess who knows, the series could even continue on after that if they decide to do like another character. I guess boxing movies, like fighting movies, are never really going to die, right? You can do so much with them. At least I think it's been proven with this series. So we have a couple new characters in this movie. I guess obviously um, one of them being, well, I guess his son was a more prominent character in this movie as well. So Rocky Jr. And then we had the kind of the return of, um, I guess, kind of the return of Mickey a little bit. Now, when did Mickey pass away? Oh, he passed away in 1997. So I guess he was partially in this movie. So at this point, Rocky's definitely retired. He's no longer going to be in the ring. Uh, but this other new character is trying to really get him to fight one more fight against his so-called champion. So Richard Gant played George W. Duke, who is this other promoter who's really trying to get Rocky back in the ring one more time, any way that he can. And then this kid comes into Rocky's gym, named Tommy Gunn, and kind of proves himself a little bit to be quite a fighter. Obviously, we kind of get a little bit of a dive into Tommy's life. I think a little bit more than really what Rocky's life was like, because we kind of hear that Tommy's childhood wasn't really the greatest, with his dad being an alcoholic and beating up him and his mom all the time, and so he kind of, I guess, kind of went to the streets, right? Lived on the streets, which I think is kind of similar to what Sylvester Stallone's life was actually like. So it kind of makes sense that it was put into this movie as the last one, that Rocky's going to kind of train this kid up and give him a title shot, and Rocky's kind of living through Tommy Gunn, right? But I think Tommy kind of gets fed up with being in the shadow of Rocky and eventually gets to the point where he wants to fight Rocky. And of course, obviously, uh, uh, George Duke is going to try to set that up. Um, and then it ends up just being in a street fight sort of ordeal. But along the way, as Rocky is training Tommy Gunn to be the next big thing, his son is getting beat up at school, and then I believe it was Polly that actually starts bringing Rocky Jr. to the gym to train, and then it gets to the point where he ends up whooping the kid that was beating him up and taking his coat and his lunch money every day because, yeah, he was, Rocky Jr. was supposed to be the rich kid, so of course all the kids wanted to pick on him and steal from him, and because they, I guess, felt less fortunate, I suppose, because he was already well known, and his dad was at the end of his career due to a serious brain injury that could, I guess, if he got hit anymore, could really seriously damage him, right? But it gets to the point where he gets in a street fight with Tommy, and that for me was probably my favorite scene out of any of these movies because um, George Duke is really trying to get Tommy not to fight Rocky in the street. He only fights in the ring, and Tommy is obviously trying to prove that he can fight anybody, anywhere, anytime. Kind of similar to what Rocky was like when he was younger. Now, obviously, at this point, Rocky would probably be much closer to 40, if not already in his 40s. So for him to even step back in the ring, especially after knowing what he does, and then I guess he has obviously some serious debt problems, and it seems that Polly has gambled the last bit of their money away, and so they have to end up moving into kind of a more rundown part of town again. And then when Rocky finds Tommy, he starts to manage him. Even though at first he's kind of a little reluctant, he starts to manage him and see the potential in him, and he gives Tommy quite a few fights. And then obviously George Duke sees the potential in Tommy too, so he thinks he can get the next Rocky to fight for the championship, I guess against one of his guys. And then obviously they win the championship, and people still say that he's not really as good as Rocky. The championship was kind of handed to this guy because Rocky never really decided to defend it again against anybody else. So the other guy was kind of like a paper champion, right? Because he didn't actually win it or defend it against Rocky. So the only way to prove himself would be to fight the best. So that's what obviously George Duke is going to try to set up. But Rocky wants no part of it uh, until Tommy sucker punches Paulie in the bar, and then he says, "Oh right, you want a piece of me? I'll fight you out on the street." Which obviously George Duke is totally against. Doesn't want Tommy to be doing that. He wants only Tommy to fight in the ring. And the street fight was probably had to be my favorite fight scene, probably out of all of these movies, besides the one with Drago, right? Um, like it was probably the most brutal fight, and it was kind of funny to think that this would have been just shortly after all the Rambo movies. Because when did the last Rambo movie come out? Like Rambo 3 would have been. Let's see. Rambo 3 would have been 1988, so 2 years before this movie, because there was First Blood, and then First Blood Part 2, and then Rambo 3, and then we had the other Rambo movie in 2008, and then Rambo Last Blood in 2019. Let me tell you, all those movies are just fantastic. But anyway, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about Rocky 5. So yeah, even during the fight, Rocky's kind of like really getting into it in the basement when Tommy's fighting, and he thinks that Tommy's going to thank him for everything he did, and then he ends up thanking the George Duke guy for being the angel on his shoulders, even though George didn't really do much. He just kind of stole the fighter, right? Uh, and only really cares about making the money, not about the actual fighter. And when Rocky tries to say that to Tommy in the bar, Tommy just kind of ignores him and says, like, even when they were having the conversation before, like, I was never going to get a title shot, I'm 22-0, blah, 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 sort of thing. And Rocky said, well, you got to kind of learn as you go, right? You can't just, like, all of a sudden. It's very rare that many fighters escalate right to the top. I mean, some of them do after, like, 3 or 4 fights. I think it all depends on like how dominant of a performance you're having. Now, to say that Tommy wasn't dominant in most of his performances would be lying, because he was a pretty powerful dude and was knocking guys out left and right. But I think Rocky wanted to take his time and really kind of train this guy, because probably Tommy would have been in his 20s when Rocky was training him, right? So I'm guessing that's probably somewhere in the age group of that. But yeah, as he's training Tommy again, he was kind of losing a sense of his family, kind of lost a connection with his son, because him and his son were supposed to be the two that were tight, and his son starts hanging out with a kind of a kind of a bad crowd, I guess, after he gets in the fight. Although the girl of the group kind of kept him grounded a little bit. I think they might have ended up kind of dating, because at this point, Rocky's son would be a teenager, I do believe, so he would have been in high school. So Adrian kind of brings Rocky back down to ground after Tommy decides to go with the other guy and leave, and Rocky kind of does whatever he's doing after that. And then the street fight was just absolutely brutal, and I'm glad that Rocky took it to this kid and kind of showed him that you should never fight the guy that trains you, because he will show you a lot, but he won't show you everything he knows, and he'll always find a way to beat you. And I know that Rocky was having flashbacks of Mickey telling him to get up, didn't hear no bell, because it's a street fight sort of situation, right? So there is no end until one of them is just dropped and decides not to get back up or say, I give up, sort of thing. That's how a street fight would go. So yeah, but quite a bit of it was violent, for sure, I would say. And it seemed like Rocky was going to lose, but I mean, his son was there rooting him on, so I think that kind of gave him some extra motivation to win. Obviously, you don't want to lose in front of your family, and who was Tommy really losing in front of his so-called girlfriend that was kind of part of the, like, I guess, bait to draw him in, right? Because her name was Karen, played by Delia Shepard. I believe that was who. Yeah, that must have been who it was. Played the redhead and whatnot. Yeah. So the street fight was a pretty brutal fight at the end of the movie, and I think that really kind of elevated the film to my rating of a 10 out of 10. This was the first in the series so far that I rated a 10 out of 10, so that's pretty impressive. We'll see where we go from here. Obviously, Rocky Balboa is next. Probably won't be watching that this morning because I didn't realize how much time had passed. It's already like 8 o'clock, so and I got to get some sleep to see what the weather's going to be like tonight, because it's just the end of February now, and it seems that winter has just hit us all of a sudden out of nowhere, because it hasn't really been that bad of a winter this year. And then, I don't know, winter just starts in March in Canada apparently now, so yeah, because we only got a few more days left of February really before March, and yeah, winter just kind of hit us with a huge storm yesterday, so I ended up leaving work early. Was there anything else I really wanted to add? I don't think so. I think I was just really happy to see Rocky getting kind of like a different kind of scenario type fight, and there wasn't as much training in this one. I mean, sure, he trained Tommy, but it wasn't like the copy and paste training scenes that we saw in previous movies. And it was kind of nice to have like a little bit of a different storyline to it, I think, in that sense. So yeah, I think that kind of boosted the film up a little bit more for me, even though it got a horrible rating on IMDb, only a 5.3. So I guess this film wasn't really received well when it. I don't know, how long has IMDb been around? Like, not really that long, I don't think, and it's getting a horrible score. So kind of odd, because I think I enjoyed this one. Yeah, I enjoyed this one more than any of the other previous films. And that's very hard to do, I think, as a filmmaker. And Sylvester Stallone was a writer in most of these, and he directed a lot of the films too himself. So, I mean, he's always had some sort of say as to what, like, a little bit of what goes in the films, obviously, right? And to be directing, writing, and acting in your own films, that would be an incredible feat on its own, especially in those days. I don't think that would have been really heard of too much, like back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Probably most people would have just been doing one of those things, right? So kudos to him for, having so much involvement in these films, for sure. And yeah, I guess we'll see what Rocky Balboa is like, and I will see you guys in the next review. Again, 10 out of 10 for this film. Bye-bye for now.